not a song. And if we begin learning the new chapter, chapter 23, we'll ask ourselves, is it or not connected to the former chapter? Because how does the new chapter, chapter 23, open up with Ve'ele divrei David ha'achronim? And these are the last words of David. Does it mean the last words before his passing away? Seems not. Anyone that reads the beginning of the book of Kings, the next Sefer, where we see David on his deathbed, okay, being visited by his wife, by the prophet. What can be done in order to preserve his body temperature, because he's losing his body temperature? So we'll ask ourselves, what does it mean, Divrei David Achronim? Can be the last words of his life. And then the Tanakh says, Ne'um David ben Yishai, U'ne'um HaGever Hukam Al, Mashiach Elohei Yaakov, U'ne'im Zmirot Yisrael. And it seems to be, here we're going back. We're going back into some sort of style of poetry, of song. This is the speech of David ben Yishai. Well, I know who David ben Yishai is. U'ne'um HaGever. And this is the speech of the man, the strong man. I know he is. And why is he called Hukam Al? Does Al refer to anything above and beyond? And then the ending of this pasuk also requires questioning. That he's called Mashiach Elokei Yaakov. Why is he called that name? And at the end, U'ne'im Zmirot Yisrael. Okay, a very special description that he's the most pleasant of those that are singing the songs, the melodies, the praises of Israel, Zmirot Yisrael.
What is Ne'um David ben Yishai?
So that's what we're going to try to understand. We said that question. Why is it mentioned in this pattern, in this matter? And then, one second, sirs, patience. And then, Bet, Gimel, and Daled, Ruach Hashem, Diber bi Umilato al Lishoni. Clearly, it's written in a poetic way. So we're going to try to understand what's going on. And then we'll open up 4 questions. That's question number 1. So let's just hand this out. Okay. So we have a source sheet here in front of us that I think will help us out. So we want to answer, what is Divrei? The words of David? Is this the poetry of David? Is the last words of David? Question 1. And why does it say Achronim? Okay. Is there Rishonim, or the first words of David? That's what several of the Rishonim ask. And we want to understand why are the words Achronim here. So if we see Rashi and the Radak, which I brought here, then I think we'll be able to understand. The Rashi really asked this question, the opening Rashi here in this chapter. Rashi says on the words Ve'ele Divrei David, Nivuat David Achronim. So he declares, Ne'um Divrei David. No, we're not talking here about what? The last words of David before he dies, but rather this is his last prophecy. His last prophecy. So Dvarim, and it makes sense because often we see the verb lidaber, that God prophesies Moshe Rabbeinu, God speaks to this prophet or that prophet. So the word divrei is a break off from the word lidaber, to speak. And therefore Rashi says these are his last words of prophecy. What does Rashi say afterwards? Do you see the Rashi we're looking at?
Here?
Absolutely. So Rashi rhetorically asks, Umi hema rishonim. Well, if these are his last words of prophecy, then what was his earliest? And Rashi answers, Rishonim, which would be an inference from this pasuk, are what? Divrei hashira ha'amurim lemala. Wow. The words of praise that David said is the previous chapter. That is his first words of poetry or praise in this Sefer. And we're not talking here about the book of Psalms. The book of Psalms has a lot of poetry. But here, these are the last words of David as far as his prophecy is. And the earlier chapter, they would be the earliest words of his prophecy regarding poetry. Aval, however, Bechol Shirot V'Tishpachot She'amar, in all the what? The songs, praises that he wrote, which is probably referring to the book of Psalms. Ein Nikraim Dvarim, there we're not going to find the word Dibur. So summary, Divrei David here is prophecy. Number two, the Rishonim, the earlier words that we're inferring from, that's the earlier chapter, and that is the song. But all the other songs of David, they're not coined Divrei. Okay, they're not coined Divrei. Now, what is this a ramification for us? Let's see the Radak, the second commentator, Rabbeinu David ben Kimchi, and he explains a little differently. Let's see. Ve'ele divrei David ha'achronim. What does the Radak say? Od, these are the words, the last words of David, meaning Od milvad hashira. So these achronim are in addition to the shira that David said before. Od milvad hashira amar dvarim eila shehem divrei shavach voda la'el sheikimu lemalchut. The previous chapter, of course, are words of poetry, of praise, thanks to Hashem that the house of David was established as the kingdom. And what's this now? Interesting. This chapter is not like what Rashi says, the last prophecy, but these are the last words of poetry / praise that David will be saying. The Radak notices he used the word mizmorim. Okay, mizmor is a type of poetry. Where do we see it appearing, the word mizmor? In which book? Tehillim. Okay, so mizmorim, we see a lot of forward or openings for song, praise that David uses the word mizmor from the word lizamer in Psalms. So according to the Radak, this chapter, after all of Psalms, all the poetry read, is the ending of David's poetry and song. Ki acharze lo afia alav ruach hakodesh. After this chapter, divine inspiration does not appear on him whatsoever. Now, if we want to, I want to ask you, where does the last words of David's poetry, his special praise of God, where does it appear? Do you know where it appears? Which book should we open up to read the words of poetry of David? That's right, Tehillim. But unlike what you think, we're not going to open up the last chapter of Tehillim. We're going to open up chapter Ayin Bet 72. 72. We're going to notice something, that really the end or the culmination of David writing Psalms is not at the end of the Sefer. Look at Ayin Bet, the end of Ayin Bet, chapter, the end of 72. And let's see the last 1, 2, 3 verses. David opens up with Baruch Hashem Elokei Yisrael. He's blessing God, who is the Almighty of Israel. Osei Niflot Levado, the God that does wonders by himself. And then David says, Uvaruch Shem Kevodo Leolam, and be blessed the glorious name of God forever. And then David says, V'yimalech Vodo, and let his honor, his glory fill up what? Et kol haaretz, last 2 words of this pasuk, Amen ve'amen. That's what David says. And then the culmination, Kalu, Tefilot, David ben Yishai. This ends the prayers, the praises of David ben Yishai. In other words, really the ending of Tehillim, of David writing his poetry, his praise of God, ends here at the end of chapter 72. For other reasons, which maybe we're going to state later, there's a continuation. But as far as his last words of praise, this is it. Okay? Now, let's take that into account and try to understand better Pasuk Aleph. Let's go back to ourselves right now to the book of Samuel, chapter 23, where you and others ask the questions, why Neum David ben Yishai, the speech of David ben Yishai, and the speech of the Gever who come al, and then Mashiach Elokei Yaakov, and then Naim Zmirot Yisrael. It seems that there are 4 breakdowns in this pasuk, and the truth is that the Malbim, one of the great later commentators, who I didn't bring here in the worksheet, but I'm going to share with you. He appears on my Mikrot Gedolot, on my copy, and he raised this question: why is there a breakdown here to 4 parts? And he says they're referring to 4 different periods of time of David. We all saw in the book of Psalms right now, in chapter 72, how David signed his name. Okay? Kalut Tfilah, this is the ending of the prayers of David ben Yishai. That is really the ending of Psalms, and apparently he did it towards the end of his life, at the end of his life. Okay? And some of you may know, there are at least 4 authors in the book of Psalms. At least 4 authors in the book of Psalms. And of course, David is the major author. And that'll explain to you why at the end of 72 in Psalms, he basically put his John Hancock there. He signed his name at the end of that chapter, that you know that it's David writing these Psalms. Now, in the book of Psalms, we all know that it's not prophecy. For that reason, our sages put the book of Psalms as part of a larger group called the Ketuvim, the scriptures. What separates the scriptures from the book of prophets? Prophecy. Prophecy is a higher level of communication to God, as far as Ruach HaKodesh, divine inspiration, is a lower level of divine closeness. Here, Ve'ele Divrei David Achronim, Neum David ben Yishai, is referring that during the course of David's life, Aleph, prior to being a king, Bet, he was getting it out of Ruach HaKodesh. That's what he's referring to. That there are words of David that are written out of Ruach HaKodesh, which is more or less the book of Psalms. That's part 1 of this pasuk. There are Dvarim, praise of God, when David was called just David ben Yishai, wasn't a king, and was only out of Ruach HaKodesh. Okay? And that's obviously prior to when he was a king, when he was a shepherd. When he was a shepherd out there alone in the Judean hills and the wilderness, overlooking maybe the Yam HaMelech from a distance, he would write and reach heights of closeness to God. He would get great divine ideas, but that's called Ruach HaKodesh. That's divine inspiration, milamata lemala, going above. Part 2 is when David wrote song after he was anointed as king. And that's called here in this pasuk, Neum HaGever Hukam Al. What does the term Hukam Al? He was uplifted on. He was made king of Israel. Then too, he wrote wonderful Zmirot after being anointed as king. And therefore he's called what? Mashiach Elokei Yaakov. That's why the inscription, Mashiach the anointed, the God of Jacob. And those are Zmirot that he authored for the need of all of Klal Yisrael. Whatever miracles, whatever great things would have to be written, or prayers, or praises who come out as a king. That's part number 2. Part 3, actually there's not 4 categories, there are going to be 3 then. I overcounted 1. Part 4 is called Na'im Zmirot Yisrael. What is Na'im Zmirot Yisrael?
Pleasant singer of Israel?
Yes. He didn't write about himself. He wrote about Israel. That'll be the 3rd part. I want to just read her. David ben Yishai is when he was prior to be king. Then when he was king, Ne'um HaGever Hu Kam Al Mashiach Elokei Yaakov. And part 3 is when he's king, but when he's writing or authoring songs and praise on behalf of Israel. Yisrael is a higher level than Yaakov. Yaakov could refer to the Jewish people even in the Galut. Akev, the heel. Yaakov is named after the heel, the lowest part of the human body. Yisrael is a higher reference to the nation of God. Sar El, minister of God, or Yashar El, the straightness of God, as is contained in his name. So we see here 3 and not 4 different times of praise that David is authoring here. He's closing up his life of what? Praise of Israel, and it's a product of 3 parts of his life. When he was a Roeh Tzon, when he was king and praising God, but now when he's Na'im Zmirot Yisrael. This term itself, Na'im Zmirot Yisrael, raises a question. Okay? Raises a question. Because if we look at Rashi on the Pasuk, Na'im Zmirot Yisrael, by the way, have you heard of that term before? Na'im Zmirot Yisrael? When this kid was a child, at the age of 10 or 11, someone said to me that you went up to the pulpit in the synagogue in Brooklyn and you sang a song at the end of the service on Shabbat. Could you vouch for that? He's a baritone, isn't he? I thought you were going to be a tenor and sing on a higher string. David, did you hear what he said? Do you know what song he's referring to? What is that name of that song? Shir HaKavod, the Song of Glory, placed in our Sidurim right after the end of the Shabbat service. And often there's a custom that a child goes up and he sings that song. Have you seen it before? Yeah. And where did we get it from? Here's the source. David HaMelech is called Na'im Zmirot Yisrael. What did Rashi say about this, that he is Na'im Zmirot Yisrael? Is it true that David got into the choir, the boys' choir? Rashi says here in source Daled on your page, Na'im u'Na'im Zmirot Yisrael, Rashi says, okay, and I'm reading here, source Daled, Ein Yisrael mishorarim b'mikdash, ela shirotav u'zmirotav. It seems that Rashi is saying that who has sole rights to the songs in the Holy Temple? We should clarify, why should there be song in the Holy Temple? Isn't it a serious place, the Holy Temple? So why is there song? And second, we're asking, Rashi says, here he's called Na'im, the pleasant singer of Israel, and Rashi, apparently in the name of our sages, says, only the songs, the poetry of David can be sung in the Beit HaMikdash. He has a monopoly. He has sole rights. Well, why? Good question. Good question. So, there's no doubt, as we've been learning about the personality of David, he is Klal Yisraeli. He represents the highest level of the nation of Israel in all his personal character. Everything is in tuned for the benefit of the nation. Everything is in tuned for the nation of God. Whatever he does, whatever position he takes, he is going forward to promote the nation of Israel. And therefore, his song, his poetry, is not, we're not talking here about the music of Beethoven with due respect to his music, or we're talking about this writer or that writer. His writing is so high, so great, so praiseworthy. His neshama is so high. Let's first preempt and talk about song in the Beit HaMikdash. Chazal, in the tractate of Pesachim, discuss the work of Levi. Some of you know, the work of the Levim in the Beit HaMikdash is twofold. They are the Aleph, the Sho'arim, and they are the Mishorim. They are the gatekeepers, okay, opening and closing the gates for entrance and exit of the Holy Temple, which is a very important task. Who can come in, who cannot come in, what happens when the service ends, who can no longer come in, and who are the singers in the Beit HaMikdash. And the Talmud discusses the following halachic question: is song or not avodah? Is it service? And how much practice must be taken in advance for it? But there's no doubt whether we get to the solution of the Gemara or not, song is an expression of serving God, that when you sense completeness, when you sense happiness, a person sings. Okay? Not only when you're in the shower and you're cleaning yourself, you're happy and you're singing, but song on its highest level is expressing something spiritual, something nishmati. And therefore, in our life, since song is something so spiritual, we should be careful as members of the Jewish people what type of song we listen to, what type of educational words are there, or there are types of music that maybe could produce bad vibes that persons have, sadness and so on and so forth. But song usually relates to happiness. There's no greater place of happiness than the Holy Temple, because there's no greater level of service of God than the Holy Temple. And apparently God is demanding that on every sacrifice, okay, every public sacrifice like the Tamid offering, it will be accompanied by song. And the song is so special is that our sages chose songs during the course of the week that the Levim would sing, as opposed to a song they would sing on a Shabbat, or as opposed to a song they would sing on Rosh Hashanah, and so on and so forth. Some of you may remember the famous Mishnah, Masechet Rosh Hashanah, that when we only have 1 month a year, that Rosh Chodesh falls out on a holiday. Which Rosh Chodesh falls out on a holiday?
Oh, what do we don't say Hallel?
That's right.
Why?
The Talmud says in Masechet Rosh Hashanah, Sifrei Chayim Ptuchim Vatem Omrim Shira. The books of life and death are open, and you're going to be singing a song. So on the one hand, it's a day of awe. On the second hand, we have a lot of confidence that for doing the right thing, Hashem's going to seal our year for good and for health, and so on and so forth. But we get back to the question, why? We have a dilemma here. We're waiting for what? For the witnesses to come to the court of the Holy Temple and declare. Last night we saw the appearance, the crescent, the little crescent of the new moon. Because once upon a time, as the Torah defines, the declaration of the court of Israel, we, the nation of Israel, as the Torah says in Vayikra 23, Eile moadei Hashem asher tikra'u mikra'ei kodesh. These are the appointed times of God that you shall proclaim days of holiness. From here, the Talmud explains that the nation of Israel is sanctifying the calendar. We are setting the calendar. The Hebrew lunar calendar of Israel is established by the Jewish people. That means a tremendous ability. Rabbi Tzvi the Cook would often repeat this point, often heard it from his students. Israel can involve itself in time. The fact that we declare, when the court receives testimony and they investigate or interrogate each witness separately to see that their testimonies coincide, then after they have reviewed their testimony, they declare Mikudash. The month is now sanctified. What does it mean? If today was the 1st of Nisan, okay, that means we have another 14 shopping days for Passover, okay? We have another 14 days where day number 15 will be a Yom Tov. And if it's a Yom Tov, I'm prohibited in performing Melacha. Who made that decision? The court of Israel. How? By declaring the new month. How? Based on testimony of witnesses. Once we have the new holiday, the Leviim in the Beit HaMikdash will be singing particular songs of King David. He has a monopoly over the poetry written, and they will sing a particular song on the Passover public offering on the day of Pesach. But what happens when Rosh Chodesh falls on a holiday like Rosh Hashanah? Today is the early morning. It's 6 o'clock in the morning. We're waiting. Are there any witnesses arriving this morning? Yeah, man. Maybe last night they saw the what? The new moon. As some of you know, courts are closed at nighttime. We don't accept testimony only during the day. And now the courthouse is waiting for the forthcoming witnesses.
Do they still do
It's 7 o'clock. It's 8 o'clock. It's 1 o'clock. We don't know if today is Rosh Hashanah. Wow. It's 2 o'clock. So the Mishnah tells us of this case that happened, that there was a delay, witnesses didn't arrive, and the Leviim, they were baffled. They didn't know which song to be singing in the offerings of today. Is today Rosh Hashanah? Is today a weekday, a mundane day? So for that was the beginning of the sage's declaration to make a 2-day holiday, so that we don't get messed up, and we'll keep 2 days. Maybe the first day is Rosh Hashanah, and so the second day is Monday. We'll keep it anyway. Or maybe the first day was mundane, and the second day really. So no matter how it goes, one of the 2 days has to be the real McCoy. Will the real day of Rosh Hashanah please stand up? Okay, that's what we're asking. So, why are we mentioning this? That is the importance that the Levim have to know what to sing accompanying the public offerings. So here we see the gravity, the importance of the song. Now, it's work, it's service, okay? And some of you know that a lot of people take seriously, very seriously, singing in all different communities of the Jewish people. On Shabbat, for instance, at meals, we have booklets that are called Zmirot Shabbat, the songs, and a lot of people take it very seriously as the way they're serving God in praising Hashem. Although the literature in Zmirot is usually not Tehillim, okay? But people still take it very seriously. I have a dear father-in-law who's a scholar and a Levi, and he tells his guests, you want to talk? Not during the time of Zmirot. There's a time to talk, and there's a time to sing. Let's not mix up the two standards. In any event, let's ask ourselves, why is it that David has the sole rights for singing song? So let's look together at source Hey. This is taken from a midrash called Kohelet Rabbah. Okay? One of the books of our 5 Megillot is called Kohelet. I forgot the Latin word in English. What is it called? I can't even pronounce that long word. What?
I don't know how to pronounce it.
You know the name. David Hayes. Tell everyone the name in Latin English for Kohelet.
Ecclesiastes.
Exu?
Ecclesiastes.
I can't even pronounce it. Okay, we know it's written by King Solomon, Shlomo Melech, as he wrote the book of Shir HaShirim, the Song of Songs as well. And there's a series of midrashim from the book of Genesis and on called the Midrash Rabbah series. And this is the Midrash Rabbah, but on the book, it's a Megillah. Kohelet is a Megillah. Some of you know, Ashkenazim have a custom to read it on which holiday?
That's Kohelet, that's on Sukkot.
That's right.
Wow.
On the holiday of Sukkot, on Shabbat Chol HaMoed, there's a custom on Ashkenazim Jewry. So gentlemen, we want to understand that David HaMelech is nicknamed Na'im Zmirot Yisrael, and it's written by the prophet. And we're about to explain Na'im Zmirot Yisrael, of all Israel, the most pleasant, the most unique singer and writer of poetry is David HaMelech. And as we're about to read, we're going to understand why he was chosen from all figures of the Jewish people, that his song will be sung in the Holy Temple. So let's read it. Ravuna b'shem Rav Acha says the name of Rav Acha. Afal pisha asara b'nei adam. I'm sorry, 10 authors. If I said 3 before, I was mistaken. Even though there are 10 authors, Amru Sefer team that said the book of Psalms, there are 10 authors, including Eov, Avram, and so on and so forth. Adam HaRishon, even one. Michulan lo ne'emar al shmotam. Only one of the 10 is mentioned in his name. Al yedei David Melech Yisrael. Why is he the only one explicitly mentioned? Of all 10 authors of Psalms, only he, amongst all these 100 and whatever prakim. And by the way, we saw the chapter, didn't we? In the end of chapter 72, he signs his name. This is the ending of the prayers of David ben Yishai. What is this comparable to? Mishalom mashal lemad davar dumeh. Can you give me a parable to what this is compared to? And the Midrash gives us the following parable. Lechabura shel anashim, you have a group of people, hamevakeshet lomar himnon lemelech. There's a group of individuals that they want to sing or create some sort of national anthem for the king. Something that'll be unique to the liking of the king. Amar lam HaMelech, apparently the king heard all of them. Kulchem ni'imim, all of you really are pleasant. Kulchem chasidim, all of you are really saintly. Kulam meshubachim, all of you are really praiseworthy. Lomar himnon lefanai, all of you are really worthy of singing an anthem, a national song before me. Ella, rather, there's no need. Why not? Ish ploni ya'amer al yedei kulchem. Only one of you, he will be representing all of you, and he will recite the anthem before me on behalf of all of you. Lama, why? Shekolo arev. He has a great voice. He has a great voice.
I thought it looks like a crow voice, like Orev.
Kach, so too. B'shashe bikshu asara tzadikim lomar sefer Tehillim. So too, when 10 righteous authors wanted to be written in the book of Tehillim, Amar lam HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God said to them, Kulchem ni'imim, you're all pleasant, chasidim meshubachim lomar himnon lefanai. But there's no need. Ella, David yamer al yedei kulchem. Lama shekolo arev. What proves this point? As it's written in Samuel 2, our chapter 23, Uneim Zmirot Yisrael. He is the most pleasant voice. I don't think that the Midrash is to be taken for its face meaning or value, that we're only referring to a vocal talent, that he's the best singer. But he's the most pleasant writer, the deepest writer of poetry, of song, of praise of God, that represents the soul of all of Israel. And yet, he does receive the nickname Na'im Zmirot Yisrael. And for that, his name and his name only is mentioned in all the, how many chapters are there in Psalms altogether?
152.
152. Okay? He's the only one mentioned. Even though there are 9 other contributing authors, with him there are 10. David is the deepest. Okay? And we can understand why.
150, sorry.
Thank you, 150. Kuf Nun. David was a king. David was a warrior. David was a writer. David was a scholar. Some of you know that David's day would be, 18, 20-hour day. Would get up at midnight, start singing his songs and writing his praise. He would be the head of the court. He would have an open house in court. He would lead Israel on the battlefield. And as we saw in the former chapter where he's apparently aging and getting tired, only then is he told, don't go out to war anymore, you're going to risk your life. Meaning all the other times, not only was he going out to the war, but he was up in front. Again, the Israeli generals go up front. So here we meet up with this great idea of Na'im Zmirot Yisrael. We'll stop here and continue this point, Be'ezrat Hashem, the next time.